Yu-Gi-Oh! Can be an expensive hobby, and to keep up competitively with Yu-Gi-Oh! It can often feel very daunting, as it'll be hundreds of dollars just to have the most relevant meta decks or engines. So it's a bit of a shame that a lot of people feel like they're priced out of being able to compete, whether it be at a regional level or higher. That's why with this series, we're going to be dueling on a discount, trying to find the best ways to get bang for your buck and compete at a competitive level without decks being too expensive. The goal is to build your deck with $50 or less, and show you guys that there are ways to keep up with the game competitively without having to spend a ton of money. Welcome back, budget duelists. It's not been too long since I've made a video about a budget deck, and regretfully, that deck got murdered on the ban list. So while it was predictable, it was also hard to know to what extent the deck would get hit. So I figured let's come up with a new budget deck to fill its place. And if you're wondering what that is, I refer you guys to my latest tier list for the best decks in the format. And one deck that I said had a pretty solid positioning that's also not that expensive, and that's Melodious. This deck was kind of pricing out players a couple months ago as the power spells Ostinato and First Movement Solo had not been reprinted yet. But at the time of recording this, they now have been reprinted, and that means the deck is a whole lot cheaper. If you aren't familiar with the theme, it is a fusion-based theme that also incorporates some pendulum monsters. Although it doesn't really play like the traditional pendulum deck, it very much revolves around all your fusions. So if you're looking to play something different that is not super combo heavy or control heavy, more of a mix of both, as well as being different, then this is absolutely the deck to try, and it's really not going to cost you that much. So with that said, let's go into the deck profile. But before we do, if you don't want a longer in-depth explanation behind the Melodious card choices and what they do, you can also get the deck list in the description box below, where there are TCGPlayer links to the entire deck list, whether it be just the engine or the non-engine. And as well, if you guys want to see more budget content on my channel and you enjoy this, like and subscribe, as well as comment below any recommendations for further budget decks. And if you guys want to see me bring this deck to locals or play it versus other YouTubers, then your support is pivotal. So please let me know, and hopefully that's something we'll get to in the future. With that said, let's get into the deck profile.
Alright, so as I said, Melodious is the deck that I think is a great option for budget players, as there's really not a card in the deck that is incredibly expensive, with all of the newer support being low rarity. Before, the reason this deck may have been not cheap was the old spell cards, First Solo Movement and Ostinato, which were both a little pricey. However, with recent reprints in both the Megatins and Rarity Collection, well, yeah, this deck is not expensive anymore, so I figured it'd be perfect to show off. But instead of talking about it forever, let me show you guys what's actually in the deck. So the reason to play this deck, in my opinion, is largely this card, Aria, the Melodious Diva. So this one says, while it's special summoned on the field, all your Melodious monsters cannot be targeted by card effects, nor can they be destroyed by battle. What this essentially accomplishes is that into so many different fields, or when you're building a field, you summon this alongside the rest of your Melodious cards, and now they aren't interactable. Your answers to this card, or opponent's answers to this card, will be stuff like Access Code, Desiree, Droplet, Talon. So not invincible, but for the most part, incredibly hard to deal with. And why it's important when developing this sort of Towers-esque effect is you still have other disruptions. So what you're trying to accomplish with this deck is set this up and then save your other disruptions for those few problem cards. For example, you can usually see when a Desiree or an Access Code is coming and play around it with your hand traps or with your other disruptions. And we'll get to those other disruptions in a bit, but this is why I like this deck. Because let's think about it. Like in my tier list video, for example, I mentioned this. You're playing for Superior Rival deck, so no Fiendsmith cards. And you say they go first, make their full field, and then you summon this card from the deck with one of your spell cards. How do they negate this? How do they deal with this? Answer is, they can't. There isn't a good answer to it. The best answer is like Exoton Knight, which can be played around, as well as they can't kill you the turn they do it, which means it's easy enough to live and then reset this up on the next turn. And that reason is a large part of why I like this deck, but it's not the only reason. Yeah, this is the main player of the deck. Now, just one, because drawing it obviously doesn't accomplish anything. It only has its effect when special summoned, so you want to retrieve this from the deck or from the grave or the hand via one of your many other cards in the deck. And obviously, there's other good Melodious cards. This one is not new, and the deck would have been a lot more playable before if you could use this before. And the new ones that are really good are the 6 pendulums here, 3 couplet, and 3 refrains. So these are a bit long, but they're very, very good. So refrain here is going to be the star player, I guess, although both are really, really powerful cards. Because on summon, normal or special, you can add a Melodious from next to your hand. And as well as they both contain the effects that when they're in the extra deck, and you fusion summon a monster, or summon a fusion monster, they can place themselves in the pendulum zone. This includes if you fuse with this as material, it goes to the extra deck and then immediately comes out. And both of them do that, which is super cool. Great way of keeping up advantage. And the pendulum effect on this one is not super important. It's that you can target a fusion Melodious you control and then send a Melodious from deck to grave, and it gains 200 attack times level. So it can be used for some lethal shots as well as setting up your grave. Although it's important to note that Aria will stop you targeting as well. So if you go for this first to play your own Valor and Imperm, you aren't able to target your own Melodious fusions to dump. So something a little worthwhile to note, because it's not like a perfect synergy, but it's good enough. And a couplets, the other one, being level 5 means it's a little cloggier, but it's okay. Its pendulum effect, which is way better, is that if you control only face Melodiouses or no monsters, you can add one Melodious spell from your hand. Important to note that the two most powerful spells in your deck, which are like way above average power level for spells, are not Melodious cards. Unfortunately, you cannot search them. However, you can search Concerto, which is your other fusion spell. Furthermore, when this card is added to your hand, it doesn't matter how, it's just drawn or added off from the grave, or added from the deck off like Refrain, you can reveal it to special summon from the graveyard or your hand level 4 or lower Melodious monsters. So this is a main source of extension and developing bodies on the field, and you can really get it all coming along together, especially when you see the next card, which is Soprano, the Melodious Songstress. This one is a 2-of, something I dislike in deck building. However, you play 2 because it's not great to draw, and you do need 2 for some combos as well as for some grind games, and that's why there's 2 in here. So what this card does is, when it's special summoned once per turn, you can add back Melodious from your grave. So you can see some cool setups here where you can put this in grave and then go like effect, add this to hand, effect special this back, add back, or if this is in your grave because you fused it from deck to grave, you can go like Ostinato, add this back, and then effect to revive this, then search again, you build a layer, right? But that's not the only reason, or the main reason, to be honest, when you play Soprano. Soprano says you can once per turn, and this is not a hard once per turn, so you have multiple copies, you can use it again. You can fusion summon using monsters you control, which seems not great, but this deck doesn't have great fusion resources, so you can't keep fusing non-stop unless you play this. And because if you have multiple copies, you can use it over and over again. This is your way of fusion summoning several times in a single turn, even without drawing your one or your hard-drawn copies of Ostinato that are searchable. And obviously this gets bestial, it's very rough, which is another reason why you would play more than one. And yeah, I think 2's fine. Now the next one we got another 2 of, but I kind of play 3 because these do the same thing, is Sonata and Cannon. What these are important to note is they just special summon themselves from the hand if you control Melodious. So this lets you set up fusion plays if you control Soprano, or they go into a Link monster, which is actually, I want to say it's very powerful, but it's a bit fragile to hand trap, so we'll get to that. As well as this one gives you an attack boost by 500 for all your Melodiouses. Now this one just changes the battle position from Melodious. The reason I'm playing the Cannon now is with the Charmy. Sometimes if you get like Charmy, you don't want to overextend. What you can do is just like search this and then make a rank 4. This one's a 4, this one's a 3, and Baguska specifically is what you're looking at. Normally, however, you would just play the Sonata instead because this card is better, but for now, I think having the one option level 4 is worthwhile, and we'll see. And then lastly, we got Shapina. Shapina lets you add back any light fairy from your grave, and then you can only use light fairies or light monsters the rest of the turn, or the entire turn. So if you like Ash on your own turn, it's important that you can't use its effects, but you get a large resource gain because this adds back from grave, this adds back from grave, this adds from deck, this revives, and you can see it feels almost like Burning Abyss, where your cards keep recycling each other extremely well. So you can play a lot of really cool grind games, and versus a lot of other control decks, even though I wouldn't really call this control deck, you really hold your own resource-wise just fine. Now, it can be a little precarious balancing the fusions, but it's still not that hard, and I'd argue that played properly, this deck's grind game is excellent. I think very few decks can really hold up with it, even like playing Labyrinth. And when I did play Labyrinth at OICS, I played against 3 Melodious. And I think that all those matches were really close, and if my opponents had played a little better, or if I played a little worse, I would have lost. One other important thing to note about Shapina is, unlike Soprano, this adds back any light fairy. So why that matters is there's all the light fairies in the deck, and then in your side deck, that come up. Now the most important one in this metagame is Artifact Lancia. Now, I wish this card was searchable from the deck, but obviously versus Malice, this is important because you effectively get to Lancia them every turn. And this deck cannot always kill the easiest, especially through a little bit of disruption or a couple bodies. So the fact that if you Lancia them, you buy the turn, and then you just recycle the Lancia is incredibly valuable. And there's another light fairy in the deck that I guess I should bring up, is Herald the Orange Light, which you can also recycle. Orange Light obviously being a fantastic card, albeit I think a little overrated. Part of why I'm playing it is it beats Ash Blossom, which is this deck's kind of biggest enemy, or Nibiru, which this deck can sometimes struggle against, depending on how you start or how you get disrupted. This card, however, is a neg-1, which is the biggest problem I have with it, because against like Ryzeal, you go into these grind games where card economy is incredibly important, that discard 1 can feel kind of shit. So I don't love this card, and when I go first, I often side this card out because I don't think it's worth it to discard the 2 cards. However, it's very good versus Malice. Going second, it's good because if they set up their full field and you need a way to special Aria, this forces through Ash, which is their main force of interaction, because your other ways of playing through Detonator revolve using pen scales, which do not work. And then it's just more versatile than any other non-engine. So yeah, don't overhype this card. People make this out to be like some god card. It's good, but it's not broken. Now, Melodious Concerto is the one searchable spell you are playing off of your couplet. What this does is fusion summons using your hand field or your pen scales. So this is important because this obviously will naturally provide a material, the one that you search this off of. And remember how I said that both these, after you use them as fusion material, will go back to the pen scale. So generally what you can do is you can go this, add this, add this. At that point, you'd also get to revive or special from hand if you want. You fuse these 2 for Baja, which we'll get to later, and then these will go into the pen scale with their own effects. So they reset themselves, which is nice. And then, just to make sure that you don't run out of fusion cards, this card's other effect is that when a fusion monster goes to your graveyard, you can put this card on the bottom of the deck to draw 1. So it's a nice advantage, which is always helpful, especially in a deck that plays hand traps. As well as it means that this card will never kind of run out. You can always put it back in your deck and then get it later on. And that's the reason you play just 1. If you're playing Desires in this deck, which you very much can, I would recommend you play more than one of this. It is a lot harder to play when you get rid of this card. Obviously you can, because there's still other ways to fuse, like Soprano and Ostinato. However, not nearly as efficient as like this search this, which is hard to interact with because they can't Imperm and Veiler like they can with Soprano. And that's the core engine. It's like relatively small, as you can see, and that's including Orange Lights. Then there's the power spells, and that's like part of the reason to play this deck, that unfortunately are not searchable. However, your hands get drastically better when you draw them, and that is First Solo Movement and Ostinato. These did get reprinted in high rarities and Ready Collection in the 10s and QCRs if you want those. However, these should be cheap now. First Solo Movement is the worst of the 2, and that is if you control no monsters, you can special any Melodious from your deck, and then you're locked into Melodious for the turn. So yeah, I mean, special summoning from the deck is good, and what's nice is if you don't need a starter, you can just special this straight up from the deck, and now you're protected from Veiler and Imperm. As well as, you can do this into a field, they can't SP you anymore, like they have IP up, they can't detonator you, and that's really good. It's really, really powerful. Ostinato is the better one. This one does not lock you into Melodious cards, and then it special summons a Melodious fusion from your extra deck by fusing from the deck. Should all fusion. So you just get to fuse from deck, summon this, and sets up your graves. This can add back now, and this can revive from grave, and you see how it's developing. Then this will be able to add back, and yeah, so dumping the grave is actually pretty good, even though nothing here is naturally a graveyard effect. The ability to recycle means having a somewhat loaded grave is beneficial. This card is good in other decks as well. That Splash Melodious engine. This card is even better in this deck. Like, it's actually just truly insane. And then I'm playing the one Prosperity. I played Desires when I played this at the YCS. I did not like Desires. I'd rather guaranteed get the card I need, because usually this deck just only needs one card starter and you're chilling. And yes, you can play both, but I also didn't love Desires banishing this or this or Aria. And it felt like unnatural for this deck to play more than one of these cards, because they're not good cards you want to draw. So while any of these like one Melodious cards you can play without, it starts compounding when you banish a lot of your one-ofs. So for me, the one Prosperity is fine. Instead, what I'm doing to force through my plays through hand traps for the lack of an engine is playing call-bys and crossouts. You still have plenty of space for hand traps after this, but this is just another way of making sure you aren't going to lose to opponents' Ash Blossoms. And the same kind of metric as Orange Light. I want to not get Ash when I go second and use one of my power spells. This forces it through, so same kind of thing. The rest is hand traps, because it's a hand trap deck. This is how you cope going second. It's not impossible for this deck to play into going field, or play into fields, but it's not fantastic, and it also depends on the type of interaction your opponent has. If they have spell negates, for example, I guess a lot harder. If it's targeted removal, then you can play better, but you can't always choose what your opponent has, so yeah. Effect Veiler, Ash, Imperm should be kind of standard, and then I have 3 crossout targets, just Nibiru, Ogre, Droll. I think Ogre is probably the best out of all of them, so if you want more hand traps, Ogre is where I'd be, but I felt like covering myself with crossout would be the best. as well as it keeps the deck to a nice 40 cards. But that's 15 hand traps with the orange lights. And then post side, you can go into more, which is pretty high, and this still includes space for these. So you essentially have 19 non-engine, which is a really high amount for a deck. Now, there are a couple shit engine cards which can feel a little meh to draw, although they're not unusable, like these. The deck is still pretty good. Okay, so that's the 40-card deck. I'm going to go over the side deck real quick. Now, the side deck's not too important, but the couple things I wanted to go over were you probably should play Barrier still, as well as Lancia is very important, because this deck will have a hard time versus Malice. The deck is incredibly powerful. They have non-targeting removal. But the fact that you can cycle this back is really, really good. Now, this deck sometimes want a little more consistency, so what you can do for that is play Small World. That way you cycle through your hand traps to get better starters, and if you're doing that, then it means you have more access to Lancia when you play versus Malice. I think Talent is also important for this deck, because when you go first, you just want something to give you extra value when you get hand traps, because you are at the end of the day playing like a resource game and a value game, versus a lot of these decks in this format, because a lot of decks are playing a lot of hand traps. And if that's the route we're going, then draw 2 is pretty good. As well as it's just flexible, so it's not like other cards where, you know, it may not have the flexibility you want. I'm playing Chaos Hunter as another card for Malice, but I'm not sure it's the best, so I'm not going to overread into it. The other card I wanted to mention as an alternative option, or a cheap option, because there's no charm using the budget deck, obviously, is Cycle Reader. So Cycle Reader, if you're not familiar, is a Dark Machine tuner that lets you discard it to target 2 light monsters in the graveyards and banish them. So it's double DD Crow for lights. Now this matters because Ostinato and First Solo Movement both require you to control no monsters, as well as this card requires you to control only Melodiouses. This matters because it means Bistrels and Nibiru are a lot worse in this deck. Having the bodies on your field, you can navigate around, but it sucks. It's definitely not where you want to be. And if the whole point of having like a DD Crow to kind of replace that slot would be for Fiendsmith decks, this is the same thing but better, because you can hit the Engraver they're trying to revive, as well as either the Lacrima or the Requiem straight up. And I also mentioned how Desiree outs Aria, so this is a great way of keeping them off of Desiree. So this card is quite cheap right now, so if you're looking for a cheap alternative and your deck can't play Bistrels, so not just this deck, any deck that really doesn't want to play Bistrels, I'd be looking at this card as the sort of replacement, and it's something that I felt like was worth mentioning in the video. So while normally I don't go over the side decks, I felt like the theory to this side deck mattered a bit. Now besides that, other cards you may want to think about for this deck, if you aren't budget constrained, are Charmies, of course, as well as Dominus Purge, because if you pay attention, deck's all light. And if you want more going first cards, you can play a bunch of Floodgates. Rivalry and Gozen are both cards that this deck can play. And then another one that is seeing a little bit of play from Malice, because it's a bit of a harder matchup, is Soul Drain, which, doesn't hurt you at all. And it affects like one card in the deck, and it's not that important, so, yeah. Moving on to the extra deck now. So the extra deck is kind of not that important, and to be honest, I think, like, my extra deck may need improvement. The most important card, hands down, is the Melodious Fusions, and this one is the best. Baja is Graph and Seer together, which is why this deck kind of reminds me of BA, and if you like that playstyle, this is similar. What this card does is on summon, specials and Melodious from your deck, and when it goes to grave, specials and Melodious from the grave, which is just so good. And you can see here how it already lines up to access all of your different Melodious monsters, then add back, and then cycle. So fusing into this is your main way of compounding and building up your resources to then go into higher plays. And that's one other effect that's important, and that is the effects of your Melodious Fusions cannot be negated, so they can't ash this. You can't imperm it though, because imperm would negate the other effects of this card. It's important to note that it's an effect that when it goes to grave, special summons doesn't require to be fusion summoned, so if you revive it from the grave with like Etoile later, then it can still keep cycling. And yeah, it's like a Dante Seer loop, but with fusions. Then we got Etoile. This is the next most important card for sure. This card is fantastic, however, you will never ever need 3 of it. In fact, 2 is already more than you probably need. This one doesn't just require 2 Melodious like this. This one requires 3 Melodious. One of them has to be a Maestros. The Maestros are the fusions, or the bigger ones. So this is also a Maestra, the Shapina. The other ones aren't. What this card does, it's going to sound unimpressive, so bear with me. And that is quick effect. You can manage any number of Melodious cards you control, or Melodious monsters, and then return up to that many cards your opponent controls to the hand, face-up cards. As well as when it leaves the field by an opponent's card, you can special summon a Melodious from your deck or extra deck. Why is that good? It's just 1 piece of removal and it's a little bit of a bounce. Well, for one, it can wipe the entire field, but also special summoning it or banishing until the end phase Did I mention that it banishes all Melodious you control till the end phase? That's why it matters. Banishing until the end phase still means it keeps this condition, so if you banish these to the end phase and it comes back, it's still considered a special summon, so it's like Wind Up Rabbit if you played Yu-Gi-Oh! In 2012. It's very hard to interact with cards that keep dodging the field. You kind of have to kill them or the resources come back. You know, SP's like that too. In grind games especially, that effect is brutal, and grind game is where this deck thrives. It's what you're trying to force. So being able to tag out constantly is very good. It's important to know you also don't have to bounce anything. So you make it field turn 1 and they go Nibiru, and they have no cards up, you can still chain this to clear your entire field so the Nibiru doesn't do anything, but then just not bounce anything. So this card is phenomenal, a huge part to this deck because it's removal, it's non-target, it could be either single target removal or it could be a full field removal. It can be used in both players' turns, so it can be used offensively and defensively, and it dodges threats across the board. So while this card may not seem that impressive, this card is actually absolutely phenomenal and a huge key to this deck's success. It also matters because one of the fusions, Schuberta, is once while on the field, so you get to reset it with this. This card is an old card, and it is good, but it's not crazy impressive. And that is that quick effect, you can target 3 cards in either graveyard, banish them, and gets 200 attack for each. So it becomes 3k, which is kind of nice, lets you set up some lethal shots as well as swing over things. As well as because it gains attack, its effect to banish can be used in the damage step, which can matter sometimes, to dodge cards that can permanent Veiler, especially when it's absolutely critical that you banish their grave. And yeah, I mean, banishing 3 from the grave is hefty. And when you're, again, going to force the grind game, ripping apart the Fiendsmith cards and such is brutal. Ideally, get to an end field of this and this, plus the Aria, and then if your main point of contention is the Desiree, this card makes sure they can't summon Desirees, you just banish the grave when you use a sequence. And they can't set up multiple engravers because you banish 3. It means if they have 3 engravers, you banish all 3 engravers. And obviously the thing is then you'll banish it for Etoile, and it resets itself. So you will be able to rip apart your opponent's grave very well, and that's largely why this deck thrives in the grind game, because while you cycle yourself very well, you also ensure that your opponent can't cycle their grind game well either. Unfortunately, this kind of interaction is not good against Malice because they want to be banished, but it is still a good thing that exists for effectively every other deck. And then I'm playing 1 Bloom. Honestly, I probably should play more of this card because the rest of the extra deck doesn't matter that much. This Link 2 is insane on paper, but ironically is worse than you think. It requires 2 Melodious and then locks you into Melodious the rest of the turn after you use it. And you discard a card on summon to special summon 2 Melodious from your deck to the zone it points to. So why this is good is obvious. Specials from the deck. What I don't like about this is in a grind game, in a value-based matchup, you don't want to play neg into hand trap. So like discard a card in order to use an effect means if it gets stopped, you discarded a card and got negated, which is like really bad. I shouldn't have to explain that. But truthfully, the main time you're using this card is when you've got hand trapped a bunch and need to turn your dead bodies in field into something productive. So while this card is still good and will come up many times when you play, it's not something you want to prioritize or force because it's actually riskier than effectively summoning this with other fusion spells. No, Haggard Lizardos is also an important card, not for the reason you play it in Malice, but for the reason you play this in decks like Marinsas, any deck that requires you to control no monsters, because you get to banish it from the field to target monster point controls, make it 800 attack, and draw a card. So when you bestial them, you normal summon another card, banish it, draw 1, so you don't feel like you're on 2 neg. Your field's clear, and now you can use your first solo movement, your couplet, or your ostinato, all of which would otherwise feel kind of shit if you had to just sit with. Typhon's really good and you have a lot of hand traps. It's pretty good in this meta versus cards like Desiree if it's equipped with Ignumde, or the, Detonator, so solid card. Baguska for Charmies, because the deck is unfortunately a bit weak to Willows. Gravity Controller, because if you have like only ostinato for this, you can summon this in the action monster zone, and then if it gets Veilered or Impermed, you just tag it out for this, and then revive from grave, and then again you would just go like, revive this, add couplet, then effect to revive this, because you'd fuse from deck these two. And you can see, you don't have to use its effect to add back immediately, you can do it next time you summon it, because now you can activate this, fuse away, or you can fuse with Schuberta, etc. There's different ways to go about it. And then otherwise, the extra deck, these cards don't matter, but you can play the Agent Link because it requires 2 fairies to pop a card, and that could be okay. I'm playing Phoenix because of there can be only 1, I guess. Like, you have a Melodious plus normal summon Veiler, make Phoenix. It's not good, but it's your only answer. SP, SP, I guess, like some grind games it comes up, and then Goddess for Chaos Angel, and other just unaffected bodies that would otherwise be kind of a pain in the ass to deal with. Because you can set this up over the course of multiple turns. Even if one of your cards locks you, just you summon Arya with Etoile and a bunch of bodies that can't kill you. Next turn, you eat their cards and you're good. That's the deck, and we'll go over in TCGPlayer how much the decks cost. It's really not that expensive. You can see the entire deck is low rarity, with some options for ready upgrades, but for the most part, it's low rarity. And ironically, some of the cards have gone up in value to be a couple of dollars for super rares because nothing otherwise is hard to get. So it's an excellent choice for something to play if you want to be cheap. It's pretty effective, and we've also got ways to improve it, like with Nominous Purge, if you wanted to add a little more money to this deck. So this is going to be my budget deck of choice for this format if you're looking to compete without spending a shit ton of money. And this one should compete just fine, so go buy Melodious cards.
Alright, so that was the Melodious deck, and truthfully, the deck hasn't changed in the many months since its inception into the Yu-Gi-Oh scene. But now that we have the deck list nailed down, let's go over the pricing on the cards. Now if we go to the description box below, you'll find the links for the deck. First, let's grab the Melodious core link and grab a quick look at how much this will cost. And then it should be able to add to carts, everything here, so make sure it says Yu-Gi-Oh, which it should automatically do. This is all the cards for the core, extra deck, and main deck. Add to cart. And here we go. Okay, so this cart is $44 shipping. Remember, when you see this, don't freak out. First, what we have to do is optimize the cart. This is the important part. Uncheck keep current printings, because unless you're looking for specific rarities or trying to be budget, you'll deal with what you get, which is fine. Now, optimize. And here we can see that the cheapest one, I'm going to spend an extra 29 cents for verified. And verified here is $20. So I'd select this cart, and after shipping 25, and I mean, all Melodious cards are here. Ostinatos, Shapinas, First Movement Solos, Aria, and a whole bunch. So very cost efficient. Now, if you want to get the entire deck from scratch, so you don't have anything, then we can also go and grab the secondary link, list for generic cards throughout the deck. And the same thing, I'm just going to throw this into my browser, and it adds to another mass entry page, add to carts, and it should be right there as well. Now I would have to re-optimize this again, and keep current printings. So let's deselect that and optimize. And how does this deck look? It should be a lot cheaper again. And yeah, so you get it to about $112 or $115 if you want to keep it to verified sellers, which I'd probably recommend. And that's the entire deck. That's SP, Ashes, Imperms, Prosperities, which is a lot of cost. The whole main and extra deck complete. Typhon is not crazy important, by the way, so if you really want to play without Typhon, then for this much money, you can probably go without it. Now, one other card I wanted to bring your attention to was Ally Justice Psycho Reader, something I mentioned, but look, it's really costs very little. So if I just go like add to cart and then add to cart, it just should not affect the price really. I'm sure there's maybe more ways to optimize it, but yeah, it's like effectively nothing. It's a cool tech card to have for your engine, maybe needing to control the monsters, as well as it's just a good card because sometimes Bestial may not give the best value, where banishing the Requiem and the Engraver can make a whole difference. And yeah, you can see here there is pretty much no price change. So this is where I'd be looking to spend my money if, you know, you got a bit of cash infusion from Christmas and you want to play the game, you want to play locals level and win locals, you want to be able to top a regionals and do well without feeling like you're having to spend a ton of money. That's gonna be it for this time, guys. Remember, if you want to see me take this deck to locals or play against other people with it, then let me know in the comment section below and I'll leave it up again and go duel. With that said, see you next time.